Hello everyone and welcome back to my Magic the Gathering Commander Deck List Reviews. So today we are looking at a pretty popular dinosaur commander, one of the more recent ones to come out after Gishath. I feel like maybe sort of replaced it for a lot of people, but a really cool one in Pantlaza, Sun Favored. So same colors, we're working in Naya, sort of the default dinosaur colors. That's where you get all the good stuff. So this is a bracket 3 deck, so it doesn't actually have any game changers in it, but just general power level wise, it does have 4 non-land tutors, which I think kind of just bumps it up by itself to sort of bracket thing. But it's also just big dinosaurs. You have a lot of powerful effects, you can do a lot of powerful stuff, so it's around that range. So if that's what you're looking for, here we are. So this deck is very much based around getting a bunch of dinosaurs out, making sure that they do their thing on top of discovering with Pantlaza's ability, and then, kind of getting value based around that as well. So Pantlaza, Sun Favored, is a 5-mana commander. It's a dinosaur, it's a 4/4, and says whenever it or another dinosaur enters the battlefield under your control, you may discover X, where X is that creature's toughness. Do this only once each turn. So basically what this means is when Pantlaza enters, you can discover equal to its toughness 4, and Discover was a brand new mechanic for Ixalan, which is just better Cascade, where you just reveal cards from the top of your library until you hit a card with that CMC, and then you cast it for free. The difference between Discover and Cascade is Cascade was if you didn't cast any cards this way, let's say you hit a board wipe that you don't want to cast or something like that, you would just have to put it on the bottom of your library. But with Discover, you can instead just put that card into your hand. So if you got a removal spell or a counter spell or something you don't, want to cast at that moment, you can just put it into your hand. So Discover is just strictly better, which is a really cool thing here. And this do this only once each turn clause is kind of specific in that it's, the first time it triggers, let's say you cast Pantlaza, or, you have a 3/3 dinosaur that enters on your turn and you don't want to have that Discover trigger, you can actually choose to ignore the trigger for any creatures that enter the battlefield, and then kind of choose when you have that one trigger actually resolve. So that's kind of the nice part about that, is you can sort of be like, okay, I don't get screwed over whatever enters the battlefield right now. I can be like, I want to wait until I get like a 6/6 or a 10/10 or whatever to actually use my Discover trigger to get the max value out of it. So firstly, before we get over with all that, we have 27 dinosaurs in the deck, so 28 counting the commander. So about a third of the deck is a bunch of dinosaurs, and they kind of do various stuff. A lot of just kind of generic good stuff, but the fact is that our commander really just kind of gives us the max value for that, where, most of the time you're double spelling in the way that they enter the battlefield, they do their thing. A lot of these have ETB triggers, and then you're getting another spell that's just as good a lot of the times. Sometimes you might hit something that's not as good, you cast your Atali for 7, you hit a Swiftfoot Boots or whatever, but that's kind of the luck of the draw that comes with this. But at the same time, you're still getting card advantage, if not straight up just extra spells. So for this deck, we are only running 2 board wipes. So this, isn't a deck that we're very creature focused, so we don't care too much about board wiping. And these are sort of not straight up one-sided, but that are better for our deck. So Chandra's Ignition, and a lot of these, this was a pre-con, and this is sort of just an upgraded pre-con. I'm using a lot of Ixalan cards and just kind of generically good dinosaur cards, especially with the mana base. I haven't changed that a whole lot. So if you really want to go, test this deck out, I really think that just the straight up pre-con, I think it's a little more expensive now, especially now that Ixalan is a little bit out of print. I don't know if it's stopped printing yet, and this has always just kind of been the best pre-con. I think it's one of the best value pre-cons that they've ever printed. Just really, really good as a starter kit if you want to kind of see what the deck does, but this is sort of a reimagined version of it. So Chandra's Ignition is a cool board wipe. It just says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent. So if you have one creature you want to keep around, it's sort of that soul thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to have Pantlaza hit everything. So each opponent takes a bunch of damage, and then, you kill a bunch of stuff. Most things on the board that are power or toughness 4 or less, which hits most things and will kill most things. And a lot of our stuff is above that, so you can actually save your whole board if you choose correctly. It's very, much depends on, not only do you have to have a creature on the board for this to work, so it's a little temperamental in that way, where you have to be a little specific with it. But most of the time, we're a creature deck, we have something on the board to deal with. But you can also turn it into a one-sided board wipe if you have the right stuff out and you pick your targets correctly. And Awakening Sun's Avatar. So this is kind of weird with our deck, because we have a lot of things that cheat stuff into play, and this cares about being cast. But when it enters, if it was cast, you destroy all non-dinosaur creatures. So this is just straight up a Dinosaur Crux of Fate. Really good, gives us another body, and then just wipes everything one-sidedly. So good that way. But again, we don't really need too many board wipes. We have plenty of interaction otherwise. So this is kind of just a little bit of a bonus there. And then card advantage. So, of course, Pantlaza is pretty much just card advantage because it does its own thing, but these all, in some sort of way, most of the time just draws those cards or discovers or something like that. So, Bonehor Dracosaur. It's cool. It's a dinosaur dragon, one of the first ones, kind of a really cool card for both archetypes. It works really well with. It's a flying first striker, which is also nice because, you know, most dinosaurs don't have reach or flying. You know, even if they do have reach, it's not that important. So the flying is really nice just to get over stuff when you need to. And the first strike, you know, makes it a really, really good blocker and an excellent attacker as well. But it says at the beginning of your upkeep, you exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them this turn, so that's sort of the card advantage part of this. And then it does have a little bit of extra here. So whenever you exile a land card this way, you create a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token, so it gives us another body on the board. And then if you exile a non-land card this way, you create a treasure token. So it's sort of ramp. It's not in the ramp category because we really care about exiling the cards to be able to play them, but you do get a little bit extra value off of that as well. And then Gears Altasaur, whenever we deal combat damage with the dinosaur, we draw a card. So just a little bit of extra there. Earthstriker Dreadmaw is one of our better card draw outlets. When it enters, you draw a card for each other dinosaur you control. So this is something, you know, you want to kind of get done later if you can help it. Or, you know, maybe you hit a Tolly trigger and you get, you know, 4 different things. You put a bunch of stuff down, you draw a few extra cards. Kind of just nice there. Slightly better Colossal Dreadmaw. And of course, one of the best ones in the deck, a Tolly Primal Conqueror. This one, when it enters, everyone flips off the top of their decks until they hit a non-land card, and then you get to cast them all for free. So that's really, really nice, and a lot of times it gives you a lot of powerful stuff because you're getting, you know, you're casting 1 spell to get 4 of them. An insanely good card, does a lot of stuff. I've even seen it played competitively back when Dockside was available because it's just so broken. A lot of copy decks, this is just an amazing card. And, you know, on the very off chance you happen to get to 9 mana or you can transform it, it is just a Bite Steel Colossus that gives us the ability to one-shot someone. So that's cool there, but mostly just the ETB effect wrecks a lot of games. And of course, in our deck, we have a bunch of great stuff to hit that are even non-dinosaurs. Like this last March of the Ants would be amazing because it doesn't have a cap. Just cast whatever. And then, so, you know, old but gold, Tolly Primer Storm. So whenever he attacks, sort of the similar thing, but it's just the top card. So if you hit a land off the top of everyone's library, that's kind of what happens, luck of the draw. So you don't just kind of get until you get something that's good. But still, a lot of times we'll give you something really good to cast because it still is everyone's library. The only difficult part with this is it sits on the board for a turn most of the times because it doesn't have haste that needs to attack for its trigger. But really not that bad. And this, of course, is kind of the weird secret lair version I have that I think is kind of cool. It kind of still gives you in that nutrition facts the sort of things it does. But, generically good creature. We've seen a Tolly before. It's proven its worth. Last March of the Ants, one of the coolest Lord of the Rings cards, I think, that came out with that set. 8 mana. It can't be countered, which is really, really cool, especially because this card a lot of times leads you to a win, and it'll just kind of, once you've casted, the game's usually over, depending on what you draw and how many cards you're able to draw, and then what you put down. So last March of the Ants, the big thing here, this is in 2 different categories because you draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control. So, if you have another Earthstriker Dreadmaw out, you're paying 8 mana to draw 6 cards. That by itself is pretty okay. And then you put any number of creature cards from hand on the battlefield. So we'll talk a little bit about that later when that comes up, but mostly the card draw is really good here. And then Rishkar's Expertise and Return of the Wild Speaker is sort of the same thing. This cares about power, though. So Return of the Wild Speaker does have a second mode we don't really care about. It gives our non-human creatures +3/+3 till end of turn. So you can, if you have a bunch of dinosaurs, pump them all. Though most of the time they're big enough, it doesn't really matter. And we really care about that, pay 5 mana, draw 6 cards, draw 7 cards, draw 12 cards, whatever it ends up being. That's kind of the good part there. And then Rishkar's Expertise is the exact same thing, where we draw equal to the power, greatest power among creatures we control. But the awesome part of Rishkar's Expertise is for that 1 extra mana, it allows you to cast a spell with mana value 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So I have a lot of times even just cast Rishkar's Expertise into a Return of the Wild Speaker to draw, a billion cards and then put them down with whatever. But, even if you cast this, draw some cards, and you cast some sort of like a ramp spell, that by itself is pretty amazing, getting some return on that mana. So Jumping Carnosaur is one of our few other Discover outlets besides Pantlaza in the deck. It just enters and discovers 5, and it's a 6 mana 7/6 with Trample, pretty good. And it does have an ability where you can discard it for 3 to deal 3 damage to something, which you don't really use any of the time because you really want to cast this card. It's great when used in conjunction with Pantlaza because it allows you to discover 6 and then 5. So just a bunch of value off of that. Just kind of, again, a generically good card from Ixalan. And another really, really awesome card that came out with actually Outlaws of Thunder Junction is Volborn Tyrant. So when this enters, or another creature with power 4 or greater enters, you gain 3 life and draw a card. So we care mostly about the draw card, but the gain 3 life can matter a little bit. And that by itself is amazing. It's a really, really good card with that. It gives us a bunch of card draw. We trigger it most of the time. And then when it dies, if it's not a token, you create a token copy of it that is an artifact. So it even sticks around, gets through a board wipe. Really good there. And then, of course, when it enters again off that token, it does draw a card again. So this really, a lot of times, at the very least, you're drawing 2 cards off of it while it's out on the battlefield, which is awesome. Very, very good card. It's gotten pretty expensive over time. I hope they get a reprint pretty soon, but a really awesome dinosaur. So another thing here is our cheater. So this is something that I, Last March of the Ants does really well, where we have a bunch of giant stuff and we don't always want to pay the mana for it. Casting 8 mana for Gishath, that's kind of one of the reasons I didn't run it as the commander, because having to deal with, an 8 mana commander, it's awesome that it has Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, because if this does come down, you're immediately attacking with it. It can get through and, get you what you need to, but it's very telegraphed. People know it's coming around. If they have any removal, that is immediately getting used on your Gishath, and then, you're waiting a turn or 2 to cast it again. Kind of just to feel as bad there. People don't really look at Pantlaza and be like, oh, that needs to be countered, because, they don't know what you're going to get. Or, that's usually the first thing that comes out. So 1/4/4 is not going to really matter. So being able to, of course, Gishath's ability, the reason why he's so scary is when he deals damage. Reveal that many cards from the top of your library and put any number of dinosaurs onto the battlefield. So that's kind of the cheating part in here, where a lot of the times you're getting the full 7 because no one really wants to block the Trampler, and you're putting down a whole bunch of stuff. Like I said, a third of our deck is dinosaurs, so you're getting 2 or 3, maybe even 4 dinosaurs off of his trigger, which is really cool. And then there's a few other ways to pump him, but mostly just that by itself is good enough. It's a tried and true commander. That's why it's stuck around so long, even with a bunch of other options, is because it's an awesome ability. And then one of our other ones in here, and this is another new cool Ixalan card. New, it's kind of an old set, but new-ish comparatively, is this new Galta with Stampede Tyrant is really cool, because it just says when it enters, you put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So that by itself, I think this is even seen play in a lot of other 60-card formats, because you just tutor this up with whatever ability, throw a bunch of stuff down. It gets kind of out of hand really fast, and of course, it's a 12 mana, or 12 with Trample, which is really, really good, like the other Galta is. So that by itself, you get this out, a lot of our effects turn on, and then of course it's going to discover 12 as sort of an extra effect with Pantlaza out. It does a lot of really good stuff, but most of the cheating in there. And the Monster Manual, I love this card. I think Monster Manual is one of my favorites, especially within Baldur's Gate. It's probably my favorite card from that. So it's got an adventure where you can mill 5 cards and return a creature milled this way to your hand. We don't really care about that. Most of the time, you're not using that all that often unless you really need creatures in your hand. Normally, it's just an artifact where it's not an adventure that says pay 2, and you may put a creature card from your hand on the battlefield. And that's instant speed, so you can do this on someone else's turn, and that's another big thing here. Is Pantlaza's ability says it only triggers once per turn, not once on each of your turns. So in any way you're able to get out, a dinosaur on someone else's turn, Pantlaza will trigger again. So you can't get multiple triggers out of this, and that's kind of where I think Monster Manual shines the most. Not only are you paying 2 mana getting out, a Galta or whatever, but you get a little bit of extra value off of Pantlaza itself. And of course, if you put this on, opponent's end step or whatever, you get the triggers, all of your good stuff from it. But then, it's on your turn. It has been there since the beginning of your turn, so it kind of gives it haste, which is kind of fun there. And a really big thing for our deck, because, putting in Galta, giving it basically haste as a 12-tool trampler, plus its ability, plus all the stuff it does, is absolutely insane. So just a bunch of extra value there. And of course, the cool thing I like with this and a lot of these abilities where you can kind of interact at any point during the turn is you can kind of keep your cards close to your chest during, the beginning parts of the game. Or if you just have a Pantlaza out, you cast this as well. You're not doing anything the next turn. And then, oh, hey, at your end step, I'm going to put everything down and kill someone. It gives you that ability as well, and makes you not as big of a target unless you need to be on your turn. And Sneak Attack is another really, really great one. Kind of just a better Monster Manual in a lot of ways, where you can just pay a red and put a creature card from your hand on the battlefield. It gains haste. The only downside here is you have to sacrifice that creature at the beginning of the next end step. But honestly, if you're casting this and you get to put down a Gishath for free, it already has haste. But being able to just swing with it once is usually enough. Gives you a bunch of cards and gives you a lot of extra, ability there. So kind of just another generically good card. And then the last March of the Ants, like I said a little bit earlier, you draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control, and you put any number of cards from hand on the battlefield. So same thing with Galta, but it also gives you the card draw to hit, whatever creatures. So that's also, this is just a game ending effect. Most of the time it's just going to be like, okay, I cast this and I win, which is, I think, fair for an 8 mana spell, but the fact it can't be countered is kind of the cherry on top there. Really good. Genesis Wave. So this one is kind of, you're still paying mana into it, so it's not fully cheating mana costs. But, whenever you pay into X, you reveal that many cards from the top of your library, and you put any number of permanent cards with mana value X or less from among them onto the battlefield, and then put all cards that were revealed this way that weren't put on the battlefield into your graveyard. So basically all non-permanents, instant sorceries, whatever, go to graveyard, but the rest go to your battlefield. So, if you pay even like 5 into this, if this is also an 8 mana spell, you reveal the top 5, you get some lands, you get some other stuff, whatever, is pretty okay. You definitely want to cast this a little bit more, I would say, just because we want to hit some good dinosaurs. I think if you're casting for X equaling 6, maybe 7, it's definitely a steep mana cost. We are a very ramp heavy deck, which I'll kind of go through later. But even just casting this for a little bit, you're getting that sort of card advantage, whatever extra that comes down. But we have a lot of permanents that are in that lower range, like, you might hit a sneak attack or a monster manual that ends up giving you a little bit of extra value there too. But yeah, these are kind of just our main cheaters. We're not really a huge cheating deck. We don't care too much about, just putting stuff down, but these are powerful effects that when used at the right time can a lot of times just win you the game outright. And of course, our generic dinosaurs we'll get to, they're all in categories, but kind of cool just to see how many there are in here, making sure that we have a lot of triggers off Pantlaza. Another big part of this deck, like I said, with sneak attack and even with our monster manual, is giving our stuff haste, because we really want to attack, and a lot of our stuff, either is just super huge and we want to attack right away just for damage, but a lot of dinosaurs have either, when they get damage triggers off of blocking, they do something, which is good there, and they also have, a lot of attack triggers, damage triggers, just by themselves. So really nice to get something, Otapek Huntmaster is not only is kind of a ramp spell because it makes our dinosaurs cost 1 less, but you can tap it to give target dinosaur haste in a turn. So not a huge, awesome haste outlet, but it's so cheap that it's going to get down. And of course, it also has the extra ability of making stuff cost less. So this is one of the best cards I would say to get down early in the game, because it provides a whole bunch of value on a lot of different axes. Regisaur Alpha gives other dinosaurs haste, and when it enters, it makes you a 3/3 with trample that can immediately attack. So this is probably, I think, our best hasty dinosaur, one of our best enablers. If you're hitting with Gishath, or you're putting down stuff with Galta, you want to have usually this in your hand if you can help it, to make sure you can immediately attack with stuff. Rhythm of the Wild makes our stuff uncounterable, which is really nice because you're casting a lot of stuff off of Discovery. We do have a lot of put triggers, but we are casting other stuff as well. And a lot of our high-end stuff we can end up casting just because we, get enough ramp out, but getting that little extra protection. But mostly the fact that, it gives your non-token creatures Riot, so you can have them enter with a counter or a haste, which is, of course, what we're looking for there. Sneak attack, cheats stuff in, but does give the stuff that we cheat in haste, so that's the biggest part there. We don't really care that it gets sacked most of the time, because for the creatures we are trying to put in, not only are we getting a discover trigger most of the time off of Pantlaza, getting whatever their attack triggers or damage triggers in as well, just one time is usually enough for us. And of course, Sweatfoot Boots, you can very much add in Lightning Greaves if you really wanted to. This is just, the generic one that I add to pretty much every deck, because it's pretty good, getting that 1 mana equip. And, our curve is pretty high in the deck, so getting this down, if it sits around for a few turns, it doesn't really matter too much. And one of my favorites in the deck that comes in the precon, which is really cool, is Xenagos, God of Revels. So, of course, it's a god. It's got indestructible. It's, not a creature most of the time, unless your devotion's high enough. But it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, another target creature you control gains haste, so that's our haste outlet, and gets +X till end of turn, where X is that creature's power. So you can double the power of whatever creature, have it attack with something. Most of the time it's got trample. It deals a whole bunch of damage. This is really awesome when you have, a Gishath out, where you can make this, a 14/13, hit someone and just get a whole bunch of stuff down. But again, there's a lot of dinosaurs in the deck that this just works amazingly with, and it's really hard to remove. It comes down a little bit before in our curve than a lot of our other dinosaurs. Not a creature that can trigger Pantlaza, but most of the time it's not a creature anyway. But works on a lot of different cool stuff like that. Mostly the haste is nice, but the power can also end up being a lot as well. So in terms of interaction, we don't have a whole lot in here. It's just most of the time our stuff doesn't really care about it. And you really could, if you wanted to, add a few extra pieces of interaction in here. We've got a few removal pieces, like there's not even a Swords to Plowshares. That'd be very easy to add if you wanted to. But we've got a lot of other replacements. I do actually a lot of times value these sort of modal destroy spells like Generous Gift or even Get Lost. I think is an amazing card. It's an being able to destroy creatures, enchantments, or planeswalkers. That's super huge for that 1 extra mana instead of just getting the swords that only destroys one thing, because there's so many other permanents in the game that we really care about and that are becoming really, really good, especially with planeswalkers. There's so little interaction there. So being able to do that, Generous Gift allows us to destroy stuff. Faithful Absence gets a creature or planeswalker, and they investigate, which doesn't really matter. Same thing with Get Lost. It's whatever token. Path, Heroic Intervention. So this is something you could definitely add more of in here. I think even at one point I did have a Teferi's Protection, but we were playing a bunch of giant scary dinosaurs, so we kind of want to make sure that they stick around. Most of the time it doesn't really matter too much because, again, we're trying to get stuff out with haste a little bit, or just have stuff stick around and immediately attack, or get on the board and start going fast. But having this sort of stuff in here can be nice. Put a Flawless Maneuver in here, or even Obscuring Haze. There are a lot of points where you don't have anything out. Fogs are just nice to have. So that's something you could definitely add more of in here. But again, and I've said this in previous videos, I don't play in a super interaction heavy meta. You might get 1 or 2 board wipes in a game, but not something you have to worry about too much of the time. But you could definitely up this, but this is kind of where I'm sitting right now. And if you really wanted to, you could also consider the discard ability on our Trumpeting Carnosaur as an interaction spell if you really wanted to. Bronzebeak Foragers is a really cool one. One of the better interaction spells in the deck, because when it enters, for each opponent you exile up to 1 target non-land permanent they control until this leaves the battlefield, and then you can pay an amount of mana to put cards exiled with it into the graveyard to kind of permanently get rid of them. But this is just kind of generally good. We get to discover 4 off of it with Pantlaza, and then it gets rid of a non-land permanent, which is awesome. It's a pretty wide effect there. It can just do a lot for us for that. And Zakama, so Zakama does a lot of different stuff, and you could kind of consider it ramp, because when it enters, if you cast it, you untap all lands you control. So, if you cast this for 9 or whatever, or, you get this off of some sort of discover trigger, what have you, it does untap your lands, but, this expensive of a spell doesn't really, I think, count as ramp, because at the point where you're casting something with that mana cost, most of the time you're already ramped enough. This comes in too late in the game a lot of times to really be considered, real ramp. But the interaction pieces on this are really good. So it's got 3 activated abilities, all with different colors, where it either deals 3 damage to target creature, destroys target artifact or enchantment, or you gain 3 life. So this gets rid of a lot of stuff and is really nice. And, especially because when it enters, a lot of times we are casting off a discover or whatever. But even if you aren't, being able to, just have activated abilities that destroy stuff, getting rid of artifacts, enchantments, and creatures, so the 3 most prevalent permanent types is really, really good. And of course, 3 damage just kind of picks off anything. And being able to destroy both artifacts and enchantments, getting rid of the Smothering Tithe or whatever someone ends up having out. Another kind of just generically good effect. And for lands, so I actually haven't really done much with land package, so this is mostly just the precon mana base. So I don't think it's really all that bad. Of all of the sort of cheap dual lands, I think the reveal lands aren't too bad, especially considering we do have, our 2 Tengu lands in here as sort of extra support, and quite a few basics, which there is one card in here that kind of cares about the number of basics we're running. Giving stuff trample with Keswick Wolkrum. We have, sort of the generic specific tribal lands in here. Evolving Worlds you can very much easily take out, and a lot of this could be switched around. I think the only thing I really added here, switched out the command tower for a cool looking dinosaur command tower, and then a Cavern of Souls. I don't think Arch of Orazka is not that good. You could probably take this out if you wanted to, but again, I haven't really had a lot of problems with the mana base. I think it works pretty fine. Like most modern mana bases for precons do pretty well. But fetches, shocks, whatever, you could very much throw in surveils, whatever, what have you, very easily if you wanted to. It'd be very easy to get this mana base, to be a lot more expensive and a lot more, I guess, reliable. But like I said, I haven't had a lot of problems with it. And we are only running 32 lands, which is fairly low. Like even right now, you could probably add 1 or 2 more. Take out a few the things that you don't need, maybe a few of these dinosaurs that aren't, directly affecting the plan. But we are running 21 pieces of ramp, so we do make up for it there. Just need 1 or 2 lands most of the time in our opening hand, which is about what we get. And we have plenty of stuff that can immediately get our mana base going. So, of course, we have Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, Felwar Stone, Mindstone, sort of the generic rocks that are good. And I've also included in here, like Odapek Huntmaster, the stuff that reduces costs, because it is ramp in that way as well. Urza's Incubator, choose a creature type, dinosaurs, reduces that by 2 mana. and a few other things in here. Marauding Raptors reduces. You got to be kind of careful with Marauding Raptors because it does bolt whatever you have enter the battlefield. So if you're playing your Exali Lore Keepers or whatever, usually these like few non-dinosaur humans in here, they will die to Marauding Raptor. So you got to be kind of careful about that, but most of the time that doesn't come up too much. But yeah, we do have, you know, all of the cool human mana dorks that care about dinosaurs. So this one's kind of nice. It's not a super great mana dork, just kind of generically okay. And the thing is, even if it's a little underpowered and inefficient as a mana dork, again, our mana curve is so high in terms of dinosaurs that this is still pretty low end, and most of the time we can just kind of get this out. Nice to have the mana, you know, especially when it's any mana, you know, just kind of non-conditional. But we can sacrifice it to return target dinosaur from our graveyard to our hand, and a lot of times I've actually used it for that, which is really nice. I'm getting something back because we don't have a whole lot of regrowth effects in the deck. That's another thing you could kind of add. But most of the time, if we get enough dinosaurs out that we're kind of hurting for them, we either just got bored at the wrong time, or, you know, we're winning with the number of dinosaurs we already have out. Drover the Mighty, so this, you know, gets pumped if you control a dinosaur, but it's just 2 mana. Makes it of any color. And a lot of these are just all in the precon. Exali Lore Keeper, so this is the best mana dork because it's 1 mana. Basically, Birds of Paradise for our dinosaurs. Nice there. Rampant Growth, so Sky Shard Claim, Migration Path, sort of the kind of just generic land tutors, a whole bunch of them. Crop Rotation technically isn't ramp, but, you know, if we really need to, if you see someone, you're playing against someone that's playing a control deck, being able to crop rotation out for, you know, specifically if you need mana fixing, or if you're like, I need trample out right now, or, you know, get out your Cavernous Souls to make your stuff non-counterable, or really a lot of times it just ends up being Command Tower, because it's just kind of one of the best lands you can run in Commander. But it gives us a little bit of selection there. And then Progenitor Icon. So this one is a mana rock. You know, it's kind of one of the bad old mana rocks where it's a 3 mana, taps for 1 mana. But the cool thing is when it enters, you choose a creature type, and then you can tap it instead of for mana to give the next spell of the chosen type you cast this turn flash. So this allows you to cast a dinosaur on someone else's turn. And like I said earlier, with putting down creatures on our opponent's turns, when we do that, Pantlaza is once per turn trigger, not once per each of our turns triggers. So you can do this on opponent's turn. So, you know, okay, I'm gonna, you know, get down whatever. Let's say I have Pantlaza trigger on the turn it comes down, and then, you know, next turn I give, you know, a Bonehorde Dracosaur flash, get that down. Our Pantlaza will trigger again. So kind of just a little bit of extra there, sort of cheeky good synergy that's just kind of generically nice to have. And again, it works in the same way because we're putting this down on opponent's turn. We can kind of get whatever we bring out pseudo haste, which is nice, and as well just kind of keep stuff close to our hand without revealing it until the last second where they have the least amount of time to interact with it. And Topiary Stomper, so these are sort of our dinosaur ramp spells. When it enters, you just tutor for a basic land card on the battlefield, and it can't attack or block unless you have control of 7 or more lands, which doesn't really matter. We don't really care about that. Mostly the fact that, you know, it discovers and gives us a land. Weird Swordtooth is one of the best ones because it just says we can play an additional land on each of our turns, so this can be a whole lot of ramp. It's a 3 mana 5/5, so it's really cost efficient for, you know, paying 3, getting Discover 5 trigger is really, really good with Pantlaza. And it can attack or block unless you have the City's Blessing. Again, we don't really care about that. We get the City's Blessing pretty easily in this deck because we're so permanent focused. But it's just a generically good, pretty efficient card for our game plan. And Rigger Behemoth is, so kind of contrary to what I said with our R9 drop, is this 6-drop ramper, that when it enters, you become the Monarch, and as long as you're the Monarch, whenever you tap a land for mana, you add 1 mana additional of any color. So this is, it's one of those cases where it is pretty expensive for a ramp spell. You know, 6 mana is pretty far into the game where ramp starts mattering a whole little bit less, but there are a lot of ways we can sort of just cheat this into play, where unlike, you know, our Zakama, we're able to just kind of get this out easier. Doesn't care about being cast. You can just kind of put this down. And the doubling effect is kind of what I think allows this to really be a ramp spell where, you know, you're paying 6 mana for it, but the next turn you're getting, you know, if you have at least 6 lands, you know, you're getting 12 mana off of that, or 15, or I guess not an odd number of mana, you know, 16, 20 mana very easily off of this. And because we're playing dinosaurs, it's going to be extremely hard for them to get the Monarch back. So a lot of times this just becomes, you know, basically unconditional mana doubling, which is cool there. Yeah, that's kind of our ramp package, so just a bunch of, you know, the good ramp stuff. And again, you could switch a few things in here. Like I would probably add, I don't think it's in here, but like a Nature's Lore You could add in a 3 visits, that sort of thing, if you wanted to get a little more specific with it. But again, I don't think we have too bad. Like, Migration Path isn't the greatest, but you know, kind of just generically good for what a precon is. You know, like I said, this is a lot of precon. This little symbol here is the precon. So if you see any of that, you can tell that there's a lot of precon in here, because that, and I think that just stands to how good the precon is. And then tutors, so we don't really have a whole lot of tutors in here. I kind of wanted to keep them a little dinosaur focused. And of course, you know, I think the more tutors you have, the more samey the deck gets. And I think that's you know, something I try to avoid a lot of times with my recent deck building, just to make the deck not even feel more casual, but just more varied. I like to just kind of see how a game turns out, and I don't want to go to the same lines every time. And it's hard not to beat the same lines every time, because, you know, the best line is just kind of the best line, which you can fall into this with Savage Order. So Savage Order is just a natural order for dinosaurs, which again, you know, is just really good. So when as initial cost to cast a spell, you sacrifice creatures with power 4 or greater. A lot of times this just ends up being Pantlaza. You know, it's really good that we have this in the command zone, because it gives us that ability to sack it right away. Of course, usually the next turn, but we get our value off of that. And the big thing here is we just get to go tutor for any dinosaur onto the battlefield, and it gets indestructible till your next turn. Indestructible doesn't really matter most of the time, but a lot of times what this ends up getting is just our Galta that just allows us to, you know, crap out our hand onto the battlefield immediately. And I've done that actually quite a few times, and usually that's enough to win the game. But a 4-mana win the game card is pretty powerful. But of course, it's specifically, you know, it's a Jurassic Park card. It's dinosaur. I feel like it's, you know, plenty, you know, has an excuse to be in here. So I don't think it's too bad. But it's an amazing card for this, and I feel like a lot of people don't know about this card because it is kind of specific and was from Jurassic Park. But if you're running a dinosaur deck, just run this in here. It's just amazing. And then, weirdly enough, we are actually running a battle, which I think is probably the best battle with Invasion of Ikoria. So this is just X, 2 green. When it enters, you tutor for something, a non-human, from your graveyard and or your library, with mana value X or less, and put it on the battlefield. So this is just going to get us, you know, whatever cost of a dinosaur onto the battlefield with a little extra 2-mana addition for whatever we're tutoring. We don't really care about whatever this flips into. I think it does technically flip into a dinosaur, which it can be kind of cool. Gives us another thing to kind of throw out. And then the kind of weird part about this is it does have us assign combat damage. Kind of weirdly, but it ends up being a lot better. I don't think I've ever flipped this because it doesn't really matter, and a lot of times you don't get enough turns in a row where after you tutor that this ever ends up mattering. Though a lot of times it's not too hard because most dinosaurs do have trample. It could be pretty easy to get this out. It just doesn't matter. Kind of just another generically good tutor spell, and as far as tutoring goes, especially in green, a pretty cheap one as well. Finale of Devastation, I immediately put this into a deck once I opened it because I'm like, it's dinosaurs. You're going to put in a dinosaur deck. So like, again, I feel like it kind of fits in here. So this is another kind of generically good one. Has just about the same text as our Invasion of Ikoria. It does specify non-human. It can be any creature. So if you really needed to grab a mana dork, if you're hurting that badly on mana, you can go grab one of them. And then of course, the big thing here with the finale cycle is if X is 10 or more, creatures you control get +X and haste till in a turn. So another kind of haste enabler. Most of the time I didn't really include that in that category because this is, you have to pay at least 12 mana into this to be able to get the haste outlet. And though if you are paying that as well, this is basically just a crater hoof because it gives your creatures also a minimum +10/+10, and they already have trample, so it doesn't really matter there. But kind of another game ender can be, but a lot of times it's just kind of generically good tutor piece. And a Court of Calling is slightly more expensive for a tutor, but allows us to convoke. So for our stuff out, a lot of times it ends up being a lot cheaper because you can pay using your creatures. Yeah, not a lot of tutoring in the deck, just a little bit for when we need to get what we need to get. And a lot of times, even if you want to play this more, you know, with a variety, you get something that's just, oh, hey, I'm gonna go grab a rampaging Brontodon. And then, you know, discover for 7 off of that, whatever you can grab. We do have quite a, you know, a variety of dinosaurs with varying mana costs, so you can usually play these at any point in the game and grab a dinosaur that you need. And then we come to our last category here. So there are, you know, quite a few cards that are just kind of in here for value. I don't think any of them are necessarily, you know, ones that you need to take out of the deck. Like maybe out of any of these, you could take out like Wrathful Raptors. Rampaging Brontodon is a little bit clunky because it has to attack sort of like other Atali. But I think they're still really, really good for the deck. Chroma's Will. So this is one of the, I think the highest value reprint from the precon. This is an amazing card that is another kind of just game ender. So it's part of the cycle where you choose one, and if you control your commander, you choose both, which is kind of what we're trying to do here, is get both these effects. And if you do get both the effects, you give all your creatures Flying, Vigilance, Double Strike, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Pro all colors until end of turn, which basically just means, hey, you can't block any of my stuff because I have protection from all colors. They all have Vigilance, so I don't get any crackback. They gave me a bunch of life because they have Lifelink, and they have Double Strike, so you kind of just kill everything right then. People are dying with this card, and it's usually everyone. And then Galta, so this is sort of just a generically good card, but it's awesome with our deck because it's a 10-2 green cost, so 12 mana card, but it costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. So most of the time we're casting this for 2 green. That's really what you want to get with this. Sometimes in other decks you might cast it for a little bit more, but because we have such, we have so many cards that give us power very easily, and this is combined power, we're usually casting this for 2 green. It's basically 2 green, get a giant 12-12 trampler, and then really the big thing there is you get the 12 Discover, which is really awesome for a deck and can gives us a whole bunch of value for that. So kind of just generically good there. And Conjali Sunwing, kind of a weird one. It's a very much, I think, one of our cheaper dinosaurs in the deck, but it gives our it makes our opponent's creatures enter the battlefield tapped, and that's huge. I've seen this played on so many boards in other dinosaur decks, and it's just brutal getting that little bit of stacks piece in there. And of course, I think something that is definitely worth mentioning on this card is the fact that it has flying. Because we have so few things in the deck that have flying or trample. That's, I feel like, Naya in general, kind of, if you're not specifically with a flyer deck, and just in general with, Magic, if you're not based around flyers, they can really end up killing you pretty fast. So having any cards with that kind of extra in here is kind of nice. And of course, it's very cheap to get down early in the game as sort of just kind of an extra piece, but it also slows everyone else down, gives you a little bit more room to attack as well, since your opponent's stuff will enter tapped. Coursewood Crasher is also kind of cool. So again, a lot of our stuff has trample, and this says whenever one or more creatures you control with trample deal combat damage to a player, you create an XX green dinosaur beast creature token with trample, where X is the amount of damage those creatures dealt to that player. So basically what that means, the cool thing is this also has trample, so it can help trigger itself. Let's say you have 2 6/6s with trample, and they both get in for, a total of 12 damage. You make a 12/12 with trample that enters the battlefield, a token. And the cool part here is when you do that, you can save your Discover trigger with Pantlaza until you hit with this to get a gigantic Discover trigger, which is also really, really cool. And just generally, it's a 5 mana 6/6, so pretty well costed with trample. And it's a dinosaur, kind of gives us all around a really, really good card for the deck. Rampaging Brontodon, so this is a really awesome card, and actually pairs really well with Coursewood Crasher. So it's a 7/7 with trample, but whenever it attacks, it gets +1/+1 for each land you control. So if you're casting this card, you have at least 7 lands down, this is doubling its power. It's a 14/14 with trample, going to deal a whole bunch of damage to someone. Ravenous Tyrannosaurus, so this is one of the Jurassic Park cards. It has Devour 3, so as it enters, you may sacrifice any number of creatures, and then this enters with 3 counters for each creature sacked this way. So a lot of times you don't even have to pay into the Devour cost. It doesn't matter a whole lot. It's just kind of a generically good thing, though you can, if you really want to, get a little bit of extra Discover value off of this. Let's say you have a Conjali Sunwing out that isn't really doing a whole lot or did its job already. Sacrifice this, put 3 extra counters on Ravenous Tyrannosaurus, so that when it enters, you can discover 9 instead of 6, whatever. Kind of a little bit of extra synergy there. But the cool thing is whenever it attacks, it deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 other target creature, and then excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. So you're just going to kind of pick off stuff that you need to, and then of course you can, if you're hitting a 1/1, dealing a whole bunch of extra damage to that opponent as well as attacking, it's just kind of good that way as well. Just kind of a really cool, generically good T-Rex card. And they have 2 cards here with Regrowth and Virtue of Strength that allows us to also get stuff back from our graveyard. Again, there's kind of generically good value pieces. Virtue of Strength specifically, most of the time we're casting it for its adventure side. You might end up getting this as a good Discover trigger off of something, which can be nice, but most of the time we're not casting it for the 7 mana cost, just because it does have sort of a restriction on its effect where it's a mana tripler, but only if you tap basics for mana. It adds that mana. So we do have quite a few basics in the deck, and that's kind of nice with the precon is, we're running 16 basics. So a lot of times we're going to have stuff that this actually triggers with, which is kind of nice, gives us a little bit of extra mana, but again, kind of just a generically good piece. I love Temple Altasaur. It's one of the best cards in this deck, and sort of is an anti-interaction piece, because it says if a source you control, or if a source would deal damage to another dinosaur you control, prevent all but that one of that damage. So when you're attacking with stuff, it gives you a lot more room to attack, because it prevents pretty much all the damage that would be dealt to your stuff. So it doesn't give your stuff indestructible, but it might as well, because you just attack with everything, and even if they chump block, or they try to chump with a whole bunch of stuff, or they have a big enough blocker that it would normally trade or whatever, it all just kind of gets negated with this. And somebody has a Blasphemous Act, that kind of just sucks for everyone else, because all your stuff's only going to take one of that damage. So that's really cool. Just a really good piece for protecting our other dinosaurs. Verdant Sun's Avatar. So this is just whenever it or another creature you control enters, you gain life equal to its toughness. So this kind of seems okay. It's a 7-mana 5/5, which isn't super good on rate. But we have so much stuff that has such high toughness that a lot of times you're getting a bunch of triggers off stuff. You're putting a bunch of dinosaurs into play that you can really pad your life total very, very fast. This card has actually performed a lot better than I thought it would. It's just kind of nice to have around for that little bit of extra effect, because you are going to be a target with this deck, and your life total is probably going to go down pretty fast. And then Welcome to, with the backside being Jurassic Park, is again just another cool kind of dinosaur card. It doesn't really fit into anything specifically. It's kind of a weird saga. So its first chapter just says for each opponent up to one target non-creature artifact they control becomes a wall. And the next chapter you create a 3/3 dinosaur with trample against Haste on a turn. So if it's kind of a free discover trigger off Pantlaza, kind of nice. But really the last trigger, once you actually flip this, is kind of the big thing. So you destroy all walls and you exile it, and it becomes a dinosaur Gaia's Cradle. So it taps, adds green for each dinosaur you control, and it also gives dinosaur cards in your graveyard escape. So their escape cost is basically, you just pay the mana, you can play it from the graveyard, and its escape cost is whatever the mana cost is, plus exiling 3 cards from your graveyard. So it's sort of that Underworld Breach effect as well. Most of the time this doesn't get to flip, or maybe it does, it's only 3 mana, so it's pretty easy to get out. I've seen it flip a few times. Most people end up destroying it a little beforehand, but even if you do end up getting to the point where you have it hit the second trigger, it's not that bad. You make stuff into walls, so they die to board wipes or whatever. With those artifacts, and then getting an extra button on the field isn't too bad for 3 mana, even if it doesn't end up transforming. But if you do get it to transform, it's a really, really awesome land to play with. Pretty fun to give you that little bit of extra value and that feeling of playing a Gaia's Cradle. And then Wrathful Raptor. So this is sort of one thing that a lot of these dinosaurs do, and sort of is a subtype that I think the alt commander for this deck, Wada, kind of plays into. Is sort of the damage triggers. Let me see if I can find a creature that has the specific trigger on it, where they care about being damaged. Whenever they get dealt damage, they have a trigger. I believe it's not Rampage. It is Enrage. So Apex Altasaur, I think, is the one creature left in the deck that has it. Whenever it is dealt damage, it has some sort of trigger. So this one just fights everything, which is kind of nice. But kind of just generically good in the way that you can kind of get a little bit of extra value off of this through a few different ways. But really the cool part with this card, we don't really care about the Rampage, but this is more of a deterrent for blockers. That whenever you attack with stuff and someone blocks with it, you can redirect whatever damage is dealt to that creature that you control to something else, which is kind of just nice. Though if you do have a few extra things that are being dealt damage, or God forbid someone decides to play a Blasphemous Act with this, it's kind of just another deterrent. This is probably one of the more flex cards in the deck. I don't think you super need it in here, but again, it's really nice for the effect that it's like no one wants to block at all anymore, because they get dealt a whole bunch of extra damage for blocking. And then kind of at the end here, it's sort of just a generically good card, is Zatalpa Primal Dawn. So this card just gets reprinted in a whole bunch of stuff. It's sort of a meme card, but it's honestly pretty good for what it is. So it's an 8-mana 4/8, and it doesn't have a super huge power, but the fact that Pantlaza triggers off of toughness, it's pretty on right for that. But it's just an amazing creature with a bunch of different keywords. It's got Flying, Double Strike, Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible. So this is dealing 8 damage anyway, which is, the reason why they lowered it so far, instead of doing 16 damage. Not only is it, something that's because it has vigilance and indestructible and flying, this is awesome because you can always attack with it, you can always block with it, and again, it's one of those sort of coveted flying dragon, or flying, of course, dragons fly, flying dinosaurs in the deck, that is good to keep around, and, you know, is very, very hard to get rid of. And of course, it's, you know, I feel like kind of just paying tribute, like the original Atali, to the dinosaur archetype by adding him in here, kind of just generically good. But yeah, that is the Pantlaza deck. So just playing a bunch of really cool dinosaurs, kind of getting generic value out of it. It might kind of seem like the deck doesn't have the biggest amount of direction, but in practice, I have played this deck quite a lot. You don't need a whole lot of direction once you have, you know, a few dinosaurs down, and especially because Pantlaza, and that's why I really like Pantlaza for the deck, instead of running Gishath, being able to basically double spell off of all of your dinosaurs is really, really, really nice, and ends up just being enough value that you get out of stuff to the point where you're winning games pretty fast. But yeah, if you did end up liking this deck, I will leave a link to it, to the Mox field here in the description below. I will also leave a link to the playlist of all of my deck lists in the description below, so you can go check those out. And I will also leave to, if you want to get a deck review yourself of any of your decks, I will leave a link to Magic the Academy, my new website, that you can go check that out, kind of get your decks reviewed by me, get them, you know, sort of reviewed, get some feedback on them, and kind of see what they're about and get some cool little upgrades for that. So make sure to go check all those links out in the description below. But besides all that, I will see all of you in the next one.